The presenting partner of today's episode is Saxton Speakers, Australia's leading speakers bureau. At Saxton, they know that the right speaker can be the most powerful part of any event, leaving a lasting impression that sticks with your audiences long after the final applause. With decades of experience, Saxton's team will match you with your perfect speaker, MC, or entertainer to elevate your event, delivering energy, insight, and inspiration like no else. Partner with Saxton and give your audience an experience they'll never forget.
You have to back yourself, and you are not defined by what other people think about you. And your choice to take that on will actually slow you down and affect you because of the energy it takes and just the emotion that it drains out of you to keep swallowing on that or to ingest that and live by that.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change. Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. Our guest today is Renee Wooton. She is an engineer, strategist, innovator, and a proud First Nations leader. Her curiosity fuse was lit really early and it never went out. And today she pairs rigorous engineering thinking with heart, courage, and real follow-through. Renee grew up on a pineapple farm in Kubi Kubi country on the Sunshine Coast. Picture early mornings, red dirt underfoot, and a girl who learned resilience at a very young age. She left home at 15, was the first in her family to go to university, and carried the weight of divorce, loss, and all the complicated things that should never sit on a young person's shoulders. Curiosity was her compass, and when her aunt spotted an article about the Australian Air Force cadets, Renee applied, and when she walked into that hall, she found her people. At university, she chose aerospace engineering. Not exactly the easy path when you've been told you're not smart enough most of your life. She powered through 5.5 years of study, clinging to grit on the hard days, and then walked across that graduation stage and rewrote the stories she'd been given. From there, she took her First Nations identity and her love of big machinery into the beating heart of human possibility at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Imagine that farm kid standing on a Californian tarmac, eyes on rockets, surrounded by people solving the biggest science problems on Earth. Today, Renee is shaping the future of flight. She is the Director of New Market Development at LanzaJet, helping bring sustainable aviation fuel to the world, so our children and their children can still look up and dream when a plane crosses the sky. Her leadership is values-driven and unapologetically inclusive. At Qantas, she led First Nations engagement, training tens of thousands of people during one of the most challenging conversations of our time. And she reminds us that we do not own the land, we belong to it, and that elders, communities and countries must sit at the decision-making table. Slow down to go faster, listen first, and then build together. Renee is not just a trailblazer. She's a systems thinker and a proud First Nations woman charting a path that others will follow. Please enjoy this amazing conversation with the brilliant, grounded, and wildly inspiring Renee Wooton. Hello, Renee. Welcome to Future Fit Leadership. How are you today? So nice to meet you.
I'm so well. Thank you for having me. I'm calling in from Larrakia country as well today. So pleasure to be here up in Darwin, sunny Darwin.
I was just going to say, I'm in Melbourne and it's not sunny. It's bloody freezing, and
It
it was
looks
freezing.
great.
It's freezing in Sydney where I flew in from this morning. So what's the temperature there just to make me jealous?
About 33 degrees. It's quite delightful, actually. It was a nice as well.
All right, we'll leave that one there then. You've got a fascinating story and an amazing journey, and I can't wait to share it with our listeners. But I do want to start on your early life and, where you grew up and what that was like. Can you share a little bit of that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably the highlights, and I think the things that are probably most important to call out are I'm the first in my family to go to university. I
Mm.
grew up on a farm with no academic influences. I didn't really have many role models around me that had a career. And I actually took a lot of inspiration, I think, from my extended family and maybe the parents of my friends. So I didn't have much in the way of support or mentorship, certainly within my four walls at home. One of three kids, grew up on Pineapple Farm up in the Sunshine Coast of Queensland on Kubi Kubi country. And I think growing up on a farm has built me into the woman I am today. It's made me incredibly resilient, practical. I think that there's a lot of, street smart that comes from growing up in, hard to do country towns. So I think that blend with then, an academic career later in my life has certainly been a pretty powerful combination as it turned out.
I want to ask you this before we go further into, you growing up, but you mentioned that you were the first in your family to go to university and there was really no one that you could look up to. And we
Yeah.
often hear the saying, what you can't see, you can't be. And I kind of challenge that rhetoric a little bit because if that was the case, then we would still be sitting at home behind our kitchen tables cooking dinner every night, right? Because
Yeah.
there's so many women who couldn't see it but had the determination to actually be it. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I find that one hard to resonate with in ways because I always found I was curious from a very young age, and I always found myself thinking there's got to be better. And maybe it was our bookshelf at home, reading about, wild animals or, just reading different stories about how people have experienced different aspects of life. I think those elements, and then seeing parents of my friends, and I guess just seeing that they were going to work and people were away from home from 9 to 5. Like that was common and role modeled in different ways throughout my life. So it's not that I didn't necessarily have those influences, but they just weren't within my
Your four
immediate
walls.
family.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
I don't know. Coming back to, I think I've always been curious. And so that has shaped my whole, personal and professional life because I've never been the one to not shy away from putting my hand up in a room to ask questions. And I always did that in school. I
Mm,
always tried to be the highest performer at school, even though my family life wasn't going so well. And I can't really explain that other than I saw that other people could do well. And so I wanted to do well.
mm. You just
Yeah.
touched on your family life, and I do want to talk about that and how that impacted you and the influence it had on you. And, just your parents divorced early, there were custody battles you went through, there was abuse, your father committed suicide, and all of that saw you going to live with your aunt and uncle in a different state.
Yeah.
I don't know how old you were, but that's a lot for someone to go through at a very young age.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was 15 when I left home, but a lot
Right.
of, what you've mentioned happened prior to that. And so for a very long time, I was trying to move in with my extended family and get away from my family situation. And it just happened that around the age of 15, the rest of my family were finally able to kind of support me and being able to remove myself from that situation. So yeah, I think from a young age, I realized something wasn't right in my home.
Mm,
And, I put my head down and I did what I could to be the best kid that I could and to get out and help around the house and with the farm work. But certainly I just didn't like the environment I was in. And the more time I spent with my friends in their family homes, the more I realized something was wrong in my family home as I grew up. So the first chance I had to get out of that, I took it.
you
And so
took
that
it.
landed me, yeah, down in Taree area, Biripi country with my grandparents and my aunt and uncle. So
And that's when everything started to change for you because your aunt was the one who found the article about the Australian Air Force cadets,
Yeah.
and you decided to go to an opening night, and everything changed from there. Share with us that story.
I love how much research you've done. Honestly, so moving into a small regional town, so the town that I moved to was Marlee. I went to Wingham Public School. It's a small little regional community in the mid-north coast of New South Wales. When I moved in there, because all of these kids had grown up together, I found it really hard to fit in at school. But again, coming back to that innate curiosity
Mm.
and never backing away from a challenge, the alternative was to go home back to the previous environment. So this was still a better situation to not fit in at school and to try and make it work. And then when my auntie came home and said, "Hey, I'd seen this amazing article. What do you think about giving it a try?" I thought, absolutely. Like, it sounds super interesting. Why not? And as soon as I got there, I felt like I found my people. Whether we're a bunch of misfits, I'm not sure what it was, but we're all super passionate and interested in aviation and in defense careers. And I was just accepted from the moment that I walked through the doors. And I think just being around people that were innately curious, innately welcoming, just landed me in the perfect kind of environment to then learn, grow, and find my passion.
How did you, because you often talk about how you didn't think you were smart enough,
Mm.
and yet here you are today, you're an aeronautical engineer. Have I got that right?
Aerospace, but yes.
Aerospace, sorry, aerospace
Yeah.
engineer. You want to be out there in space doing all the amazing things that astronauts do, but you started at the base of not thinking you were smart enough.
Yes.
What changed that narrative in your head?
The day I graduated aerospace engineering. So, for context, as a kid, I was told you're stupid all the time. You're too stupid. You can't
And you were
concentrate.
told that by your mum, right? So this
Yeah.
is, yeah, which, so as a little girl, you're going to believe what your mum tells you.
Correct. So when I got to my first kind of day in aerospace engineering and, the 5.5 years that ensued, every day was hard and every day felt like I was hanging on for dear life. And I think the grit and resilience that I was raised with on a farm is what got me through that aerospace engineering degree. But on top of that, the thing that surprised me was as I moved through my years of schooling in university, I found that I started getting higher and higher grades as the years went on.
Mm.
So the other thing that was probably not working in my favor at the time was I was going to public schooling in small regional communities, and they weren't the best teachers, or it wasn't the most relevant content. And so what I went from learning in school to then jumping into first year, advanced aerospace engineering was a
Yeah.
huge leap for me. So I felt like I was starting from, a few steps behind the average student that had, a family that were still together, were raised in a really stable environment, had enough money to send them to private schools. There was just so many differences in what I came to the table with versus what my fellow peers came to the table with. But I think the huge difference in us was I had the grit and resilience to push
Mm.
through and make it work for me every single day for 5.5 years. And the day I graduated, I realized that my mum's opinion of me was just an opinion,
Mm.
and that didn't need to define me. And so it's interesting because that actually caused almost this waterfall effect of realizing that opinions are just opinions. They don't actually define me. And so anytime I've received feedback or an opinion that I personally didn't align with or agree with, I was very quickly able to brush that off and move on without it affecting me in the same way that it used to. So it's been, I think, one of the biggest lessons to learn early on is you have to back yourself, and you are not defined by what other people think about you. And your choice to take that on will actually slow you down and affect you because of the energy it takes and just the emotion that it drains out of you to keep swelling on that or to ingest that and live by that. So yeah, it was a very important lesson to learn at the age of, I think, 23, roughly, when I graduated. So, yeah.
It's
Uh,
such great advice, Renee, because whether you're 23 or 53, it really doesn't matter the gamut of the age that you've got or how much experience you have behind you. When you hear negative things about you, it always impacts you. You always question yourself, oh my God, am I really like that? Oh my God, did I do or say that? Or, I think it doesn't matter how much confidence you have in yourself and your own abilities or how capable you are. The minute you hear the negative feedback, it always impacts you. And it takes a lot of
Yeah.
great courage and determination to actually keep pushing through, to know that where you need to land is just part of the journey, isn't it, really?
Agree. And, it's so interesting because unfortunately we all, pass through our careers and we find one bad boss maybe amongst
Yep.
a number of good bosses if you're lucky enough. And it's in those moments where you have maybe not the best boss that you can really apply those lessons and be like, great, I actually don't align with what you're saying at all. And I'm going to take parts of that feedback on and think about that. But the really mean parts of that or the bullying components of that, actually, I've seen that before and I know that exactly what that is. And so I can move that on from that really quickly.
Mm.
Yeah.
So today you want to be an astronaut who goes out into space. I really want to know, what is it that fills me with so much fear and the thought of being out of control around my environment.
Yeah.
Like, how do you land on that? How do you land? Like, there was a young girl I read about the other day who wants to be one of the first people who goes to Mars, knowing that she's never going to come back. And I find
Yeah.
that really fascinating, in that in a mindset where you want to go beyond where any other human has been.
Mm.
What drives you? What makes you want to do that?
I think it's understanding yourself and what makes you tick and, being really aligned with your passion. So for me, in making a decision around chasing or pursuing a career in space, which I have pivoted since I went out and publicly said that. So we'll come back to
We'll
that.
come back to that one.
At the time, I had a deep passion for technology, for machinery. I love aircraft, I love rockets, and just being in their orbit, being in and around machinery gets me really excited. And that feels like a weird thing to say, but it's what happens. So I go out to an airport tarmac and I'm just in awe.
You're in heaven.
I feel at home. So there's that. And then I love driving people to achieve great things. I love overcoming challenges and I love mentoring people. So for me, it was kind of like, well, how do I get into a flying role or something around big machinery like aircraft or rockets? How do I lead teams that are, innately curious and ambitious to solve some of life's biggest challenges? And then how do I be a part of the solution as well? So that's kind of what led me to thinking, what, space is probably the right thing for me, because as an astronaut, you get to do all of those things,
Yeah.
solve STEM problems, work around big machinery, challenge yourself to keep growing and learning. And I would probably describe myself as a continuous learner. I don't ever want to stop learning. So
And part of this, you went to NASA and you spent 10 weeks at a jet propulsion lab. And you
yes.
completed an internship there. Tell me, what was that like? Like, what is NASA like, and the environment, and what was it like for you?
It was pretty extraordinary. So you're around people that are working on some of the world's biggest science and engineering challenges. Everybody is innately curious. They love numbers, mathematics, and machinery. And so, seeing all of those things come together to be able to help us solve some of the world's biggest challenges is truly exceptional. I think it's really hard to find a group of people, even if you work for a top performing corporate, for instance. If you walk around the room and find out why people want to be there, you're going to get a very mixed bag. And I feel like in places like NASA JPL, you've just got people that are super dedicated to the advancement of, solving these huge science and engineering problems. So for me, again, knowing that I'm innately curious and I love working on those problems as well, it was a pretty exceptional feeling to be walking around the courtyard with people that, have sent things payload to the moon, to Mars, and ran these experiments. So yeah, it was exceptional as an experience.
So, what are you doing now?
So now, last year, I joined an incredible organization called LanzaJet. They are the first company in the world to deploy at commercial scale a technology that converts ethanol to sustainable aviation fuel.
Mm-hmm.
In simple terms, it's a non-oil derived fuel. which is really important for our future in decarbonising our planet and making sure that industries like aviation are around for generations to come so that others can enjoy them.
So I find that really interesting because we often talk about carbon footprints and you hear about celebrities flying backwards and forwards and saying, even though they talk about it and they may support it, they've just destroyed what they've been promoting or supporting. How eager are commercial airlines or how open are they to participate in the sustainability work that you are doing around this?
There is huge momentum.
That's
So
good.
over 300 airlines that have signed up to IATA. They're an industry body that represents airlines all across the world and kind of sets mandates, policies, or works towards kind of the evolution and innovation of the airline industry. Pretty much the entire IATA representative body are working towards decarbonising airlines across the world to reach net zero emissions by 2050. So we are in talks in Australia, with the likes of Qantas and Virgin and Jetstar already today to try and decarbonise those. And some people may have seen recently Qantas took the largest delivery of sustainable aviation fuel in Sydney at 2 million litres recently. So we're seeing huge commitments all across the board. The challenge is that there is, as I mentioned, LanzaJet's the first to market at commercial scale to offer a non-oil derived fuel alternative, which means there is huge momentum and growth still to be had within the offerings so that we can meet the demand that airlines are setting across the world.
Is this an Australian company and an Australian movement, or is this an offshore company that's come into Australia to do this?
Yeah, so it's an American company that is deploying their technology globally. And we are working with multiple businesses already in Australia. So we've got project developers Jet Zero Australia and Wagner Sustainable Fuels, both based in Queensland, that are working with us to deploy our technology on their projects.
And what are you doing within the business? What specific role do you have in getting this to work and to happen?
Yeah, so I'm the Director of New Market Development. I work in a global capacity. I'm here to support how we enter markets and which markets are going to be the most successful. So I assess, all the levers that make a market successful, like policy, infrastructure, feedstock supply, ethanol, biorefinery technology. So if those things are already in markets and the government really wants there to be, policy support behind the transfer or transition to renewable biofuels, we will be there. And LanzaJet is definitely, already seen in those markets across the world. So Japan, Australia, New Zealand, we're working in the UK, in India, the USA, and Latin America as well. So that's one part of my job. The other part is actually built around governance and customer experience. So I need to understand our technology offering and all the steps that take place between the day we meet a customer through to the day that we're up and running and operating a plant and producing that fuel. What's every single step and touch point, and how do we make those processes more streamlined? How do we make sure we're meeting our customer expectations?
Now, you're very young. Last year, you were named Boss Young Executive, which is fantastic. Congratulations on that.
Thank
With
you.
all the experiences that you've had from when you were a young girl to spending time at NASA to what you're doing now, what do you think the impact has been around how you lead and what you bring to the table?
Yeah, so when I think about what's important for the future of leadership, not only in Australia, but globally, the things that resonate with me are inclusion, which I feel like in today's world is a little bit of a greenwashed, dirty word, but making sure we do have diverse people from all across the world solving the biggest challenges in the world is going to be incredibly important for us to accelerate our impact. Being open-minded, leading with empathy, being able to communicate your science and technology to a broad consumer base so that no matter whether you're disadvantaged farmer in a remote location or somebody that has no idea about aviation and fuel and has never traveled by plane, through to, being a corporate executive and leading this sort of sphere, everybody needs to be included in the conversation. And I think coming from where I've come from and seeing, the people I've met along the way and what has enabled me to achieve what I have, gives me really good insight into how do you break down these conversations so that everybody is included, what makes the difference in terms of the people that are listening and paying attention and then taking action in your sphere. And then I think because of the career experience I've even had, from operational, very technical, through to people strategy and now customer experience and governance, I think that I bring a really great appreciation for just the complexity of so many competing priorities within, whether it's an internal organization or, now looking at all of the market parameters that we have to assess to see if we're even going to be successful to launch our fuel in a different country or region. You need to understand that there are so many different ways to communicate, so many ulterior motives, perspectives, competing priorities. So if you can break through to an audience very clearly and succinctly, I think that that's a game changer in what you're able to deliver and your pace to market.
You mentioned earlier all the countries that you work around. Now, each one of those would have different culture, different language, different priorities,
Yes.
Go to market, the whole lot. How do you manage all of those priorities for yourself and for your customers?
So you need to understand and respect the way that people do business, irrespective of your preferences and the way you like to do business as an individual. So we all grow up in these little monocultures and we get used to being able to operate and communicate in a certain way. And very quickly you realize, hang on, as a startup, which is what LanzaJet is, we're 5 years old today. If we want to break through the market, we need to be the most adaptable. We need to be the most culturally attuned. We need to be in person building relationships with these people so that they trust us, know us, and understand our technology offering. So that's again where I think my experience personally has really driven success for me in this role, because my previous role was leading First Nations engagement for Qantas Group. That meant I had to provide cultural training to nearly 18,000 staff. I ran that during the referendum period. So obviously there was a lot of tension and conflict or, misunderstanding, misinformation out during that time. And then on top of that, trying to provide employment opportunities, development opportunities for some of our most disadvantaged minority groups in Australia, that being First Nations people, and trying to also emphasize storytelling and positive stories to break those biases and get people appreciative and aware enough to realize that First Nations people can do anything they put their mind to, just like you and I. Their cultural differences are their strength because they're ancestors of, the oldest living culture in the world, which means that, all of those legacy learnings and the knowledge that they hold around the way we manage land, the way we, live sustainably is so, so important in the way that we lead corporate businesses today, and will make the difference between whether or not we lessen our impact through climate change and are able to actually think about people, planet, and commercial value at the same time. So all of that to say that my open-mindedness, the cultural context that I bring, my appreciation for diversity, I think has allowed me to excel in how I operate with different cultures all across the world now.
So what practical steps can organisation or leaders do to really meaningfully include Indigenous leadership and the ways the First Nations people do things? How do we bring that into business in a collective, wholesome way?
Yeah. So one of my biggest lessons throughout my entire career is Western culture is built around speed to market and commercial value. So have you heard the term, Sadhana, you need to slow down to go faster?
Oh yeah, all the time.
All the time. So we're all victims of the same culture we've grown up in. But essentially, it just means, similar to the point I made earlier, if we want to accelerate and slow down our impact through climate change, we need to include everybody in the conversation. So that means taking away status, education, and sitting down with the people that live with the solar panels in their backyard or live with the mines that are across the way from their school. Sitting down and actually listening to what are their fears, what are the things that are keeping them up at night, how is that infrastructure or operation of my business impacting the community around it? And no longer just taking something and making it yours. It's now understanding holistically what's the impact of doing business and what's my social license to operate. And rather than ESG being a nice add-on branch to our strategy, it needs to be core business right next to your commercial value. And unless we can get that balance right, so the conversation would be, let's get elders in the room from the community where we have this mine. Let's make a decision together. Let's think about co-benefits. So if we're making a dime, they should make a dime too. You know, if we're going in and we have to disrupt a community to operate because it's important to the way we do business, then what are all of the additional services and support we're offering around that community to make sure that they're as less impacted as possible? One thing I've really noticed, you know, working in First Nations employment, a lot of corporates will come to me and say, how do we retain First Nations staff? As soon as we get them, they seem to leave. What's happening? Or we have these employment targets, you know, we're expected to reach 3% First Nations employment by, you know, let's say 2026. But actually, I've looked at the pool of who's tertiary qualified and how many First Nations people actually live in my area, and the math just isn't mathing. So how am I ever supposed to get to that number? And I think that there's almost this expectation that if you employ and just offer a job to someone, they'll stay. And we don't think about work-life integration. We don't think about personal nuance and circumstances. We just
Belonging. Do they actually belong in that environment that you've created for them?
Yeah. Like, you know, if you and I go to work, what do we expect from that employer? And a good employer will sit down and ask that question and understand that. And then, you know, whether it's, hey, I'm a parent and I need flexible working arrangements, or when I walk into these spaces, people seem to be fearful to ask me questions. So how do we train our staff to make them comfortable to lean into difference and diversity? You know, there's not going to be a single solution to what are very big challenges in the Australian context. So how do we sit down and listen to people's individual needs in systems that are built for essentially bringing in the same sort of person that's successful, that can just walk into the job from day one and execute and doesn't need extra support and can communicate really strongly from day one? Like, we can't expect to keep bringing in diverse people if our expectations are they operate the same as you and I from day one.
Yeah. Well, it never works. It just does not work.
And we've seen that time and time again, which is why these stats never improve. We're not doing anything different.
You've highlighted, and I love this, that the land doesn't belong to us, we belong to the land.
Yes.
It's such a strong, beautiful statement.
Thank you.
How does this Indigenous worldview shift in the way that we think about leadership, innovation, and responsibility? Because that, if we think like that, that's a real shift in that way of thinking. If we belong to the land.
Yeah, I think that's core to being a First Nations person, is you live in an ecosystem. You respect animals and country and sky like you respect your mother, your sister, your colleague, if you're the sort of person that does respect those people. I think it's appreciating we're a part of a much bigger system, and we have started to see the implications of you know, recognizing that we have lived a life where we've taken from every room, employer. We have bought land and made it our own and stopped living like community-based people, i.e. we don't really know our neighbours as well as we should have, perhaps. We don't rely on each other as much as we used to. And so we've become incredibly isolated and highly independent. And that system just doesn't work long-term for our planet. Irrespective of whether that works for your lifetime, it's not about you and your lifetime. It's about sustaining and building a planet, an economy, a business that is going to be here for generations to come. And if we continue to all think about ourselves and where we are today, you know, it's going to end in war, it's going to end in poverty, and it's going to end in, you know, far worse outcomes. And we're seeing that in other countries today.
We are. I mean, I was just going to say it's starting to happen now, isn't it? But it is such a different point of view, because for many people who don't have the connection with land, it is about my lifetime, my lifespan. It's what's important to me right now. And, once I'm gone, who cares what happens to everybody else because I won't be here to worry about it.
Yeah. And that's a scary way to think.
It is a scary way
And
to
that's
think.
exactly why we're in the position we are today, because people do think like that and we live like that to a large extent. So my, I guess, agenda and my intent as a leader, a millennial leader, is to bring awareness to relying on each other, building relationships with each other, and thinking about how we do business and the impact that that has on the communities around you is essential to our longevity as a race, as a planet. And, I even think about it in the context of, I'm flying to all these locations to do business and simple things like making sure that I'm paying for my carbon emissions now. When I work with airlines, which I speak at regularly, asking them, what's the cost of you doing business on the communities around you? And do you fully understand that? And if you don't, you need to go and do the due diligence to understand how have you impacted the land? How are you polluting the airways? How are you helping raise the communities around you? And I think that what we haven't done is figured out a commercial system that takes that into account. So if we can't make the balance sheet work, then that way of life isn't going to be possible in a capitalist world, right? So how do we make that balance sheet work so that we're equating commercial, people, and planet in the same way?
What's the response you get when you challenge people with that?
Blank look.
Silence?
Yeah, silence. It's a huge change in the way we do business. But what is incredible is we live in Australia and have access to the oldest living people and sustainable ways of doing things in the world. We have people in our backyards that have the answers already. And this is where, again, collaboration and bringing diverse people to the table is going to help us evolve this new needed leadership style.
I was just actually going to say the same thing because, I look at you and, yes, I've done my research on you and this is the first time that we've met, but from a very young age, you've been breaking barriers as an Indigenous woman. What you did, your time in aerospace, your time in STEM, what you're doing now. And yet when I talk to you, you bring everything back to the elders and a way of sustainability and life that, as you say, has been one of the oldest in the world, yet we are really good at ignoring it.
We are. And it's scary. It's scary for people to acknowledge it because it means breaking down the stigma and the bias and unraveling that the truth of this country isn't as bright as we hoped it would be. Or, hey, I've ignored all these people and walked past all these homeless people without fully understanding what got them there in the first place. It's easier to ignore problems than to I think, open a conversation that personally I've sat in rooms with high flying, very senior executives across the airline industry who are in tears and feel so much guilt and emotion walking out of training sessions that we've run where we make these conversations so approachable, so easy to have that people go, oh my God, it was fear-based, or it was just too much energy to go out and ask that question, or it has no impact on me because I don't know any First Nations people, or, there's just so many reasons that it's easy not to do it. So an easy thing to do to overcome that is literally call your local Aboriginal Lands Council and go and introduce yourself and just talk to them.
Have a
Ask
yarn.
who they are, have a yarn.
Have a yarn.
And it sometimes is as simple as that. Something I do to keep myself in the know and to keep myself grounded in culture and for me, I grew up pretty disconnected from my culture. On top of that, I'm a redheaded, white, fair-skinned.
I'm glad you said that. I was kind of, how do I
Yeah.
find that? They'll see on the video.
Yeah. And, for me, I have walked in these two worlds my whole life. When I was in school, I was bullied all the time because I was self-identifying as First Nations, but everyone was like, well, no, you're not. Like, you're not Black. And then, so I started steering away from self-identifying just to fit in, right? And then as I got to uni and I started meeting people that looked like me and had the same upbringing, I was like, it's okay to be diverse. It's okay to have First Nations heritage and ancestry and be proud of that, even though I am fair-skinned and redheaded. So I think, my acceptance of others has come through acceptance of myself and my own situation and having to walk in those two worlds where I never really belonged in either. And I never really feel like I still belong today, to be honest. I feel like I
Yeah.
continue to carve a path that's uniquely mine, and I've grown comfortable in doing that. So
There'd be a lot of people who feel the same way as you do. Not just that, you identify as a First Nation and you redheaded and fair skinned, but even for migrants who come into this country and they have to balance the two cultures of,
yeah.
when I go home, I am really Indian, but when I'm at work, I tend to be more Australian. And there in itself are two paths. And how do you balance that? And
And you don't have to, is what I am actually
yeah.
here to tell people. You can be who you are. And I feel like gone are the days where you need to conform or assimilate to a room around you.
Mm.
And actually, a lot of the stories that I tell and a lot of the advice that I give up and coming leaders and even very well established leaders is have the courage to enter a room, endure that room, and expand that room. No one is like you. No one will ever be like you. So why do we keep expecting ourselves to conform to somebody else's standard?
Mm.
And I think that that is the new era of leadership is walk in and own it and expand it for the next
Yeah.
person.
Revel
So
in your uniqueness. I always say to
yeah.
people, I've got the best of both cultures, my Indian heritage and my Australian heritage. And I do have both. And I revel in that. And you're right. You walk into a room, and do you know what? The best thing is that you don't look like everybody else, and you are different and you are unique, and you need to make the
Yeah.
most of it.
And you know what? Everybody else feels the pressure to conform as well. So
Yeah.
when do we start verbalizing and externalizing that just turn up as you are? And I know
Yeah.
people say that a lot, but do we really feel it? And to your point, I feel the most privileged in the world that I get to call myself an Indigenous,
Mm.
Aboriginal, First Nations woman because the people that have openly accepted me the most and where I've learned the most in terms of just appreciating who I am, where I come from, what I've been through. I've never felt more welcomed and learnt as much as I have than I have from First Nations people. So
Mm.
to be one of that community is like an incredibly
Privilege.
special thing. It's a
Yeah.
privilege. It is.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
a privilege.
Yeah.
Now, while I was doing my research on you, and I had to read this twice because it was like,
Continue.
really, really, you're doing bodybuilding competitions. Because
Yeah.
flying and being in space isn't enough. You were doing
Yeah.
bodybuilding competitions. What made you go and do that?
I've always admired women that are strong, and I think, okay, first of all, I think there's so much pressure as a woman to bounce back from children, to constantly look incredible, not to mention all the beauty standards that come with that. So there was many aspects to me doing this. One was I've always been curious to train properly. And when I watch women that walk into a gym and own it, I admired that so much. The second thing is it's so easy to hurt yourself when you're lifting heavy weights. So
Mm.
technique is super important. And if you want to live a very long, strong life, you need to weight train. I sit at a desk more
Mm.
hours than I want to admit every day. And so to be able to go to the gym and commit myself to doing that and moving is really important for my mental health. And then I wanted to build the best body I could and see how far I could push myself and see what sort of perfect body I could build for me. So that's why I did it. And honestly, I have worked hard over the years. I have pushed myself in ways that I can't even believe that I sustained. And bodybuilding has to be one of the hardest things I've ever
Oh, it
done.
requires so much discipline
It
around
does.
the
Yeah.
training, the food, just, the everything that you do requires so much discipline.
And I can't tell you how that has transformed how I turn up as a leader in my
Yeah.
business now as well. Consistency, like self-care, and showing people that you don't need to just be a corporate person and not have hobbies outside of work. Like you can be successful in multiple aspects of your life. And that's so important for your self-confidence. It's so important for you to turn up and actually be the best leader you can be as well.
Mm. Now, we've come to a point in our podcast where I have 20 questions in front of me. If you were sitting in the same room as me, I'd get you to pick a number. out of the
Okay.
box, out of the thing, but we don't. So, but some of these questions are reflective, some of them are revealing, and a few of them are unexpected. So the way
Okay.
I play this is you've got to pick a number between 1 and 20,
Yep.
and we'll see what question comes your way. So what's your first number?
13.
Oh, 13. Okay. The question for number 13 is what's one book, film, or podcast that shapes the way you think about leadership?
Ooh, leadership. Endurance by Scott Kelly. He's an astronaut. He spent 365 days in space. He went on
Mm,
to become a politician. He's a fighter pilot. He just did all the things that he loved in his career, and he never, stopped achieving what he wanted. I think for me, that's what I represent in my life, my values is don't let anything stop you. And that's why I also love, knowing that I'm a salsa and bachata dancer and I lead sustainable aviation fuel and I'm an aerospace engineer and a pilot, but I also do bodybuilding. I love just doing what I want. And it's taken me many years to accomplish that. But yeah, I think that that's a great. Someone once said to me, you learn more about yourself, obviously, the more that you do. But actually, there's so many repeat lessons in the variation of things that you do. So
mm.
I think just holistically, if you have a full life, it just makes you a well-rounded individual, human contributor to society and leadership.
So true. So true. What's your next favorite number?
Oh, 17.
Okay. What's one decision you're proud of, even if it wasn't popular?
Oh, a story comes to mind about a boss that I had in the past. And I found at the time I wasn't popular because I didn't really get along with them. I didn't like their values. And, I stood by myself and stood up for myself. And whilst that wasn't the popular choice at the time, and I was given alternative advice to just make it work, I'm really proud of myself to call out bad behavior and then, yeah, work through that.
Good for you. It takes a lot of strength and courage to call out bad behavior,
Yeah, I
particularly when they're more
agree.
senior to you. So well done.
Thank you.
What's your next number?
Let's go number 3.
Oh, we're going all the way up to the top. All right. So number 3 is what's the most exciting possibility you see in the future of leadership and work? Ooh, this will be interesting.
Yeah, that's a great one. So I think in the short term for me, the possibility to advocate for climate conscious, culturally influenced leadership and diverse leadership is becoming so important to the way that I do business. And I'm finding more and more opportunities are coming up my way. So whether it's speaking on behalf of certain organizations or, being able to deliver sustainable aviation fuel to the world. And now COP31 is coming to Australia next year. All of a sudden, the world of possibility is I could be sitting at a table, working with the Australian government to make sure that we are bringing climate conscious policy and industries to Australia. And with our First Nations history, being able to set the benchmark globally for the way that corporates do business moving forward. I think that that's one of the most exciting propositions for me that I see into the future is to be at the forefront of leading that new motion of leadership.
Oh, I'm just so excited to hear that from you because the level of influence that you will bring from all the discussions we've had today, to have someone like yourself around that table for the level of influence you will bring, not just for Australia, but globally. How amazingly wonderful that you have the ability to do that.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think that I am there, but I see the opportunity and for the first time, probably in the last year, I realized people are actually listening and
Mm.
it's a really special place to be. And not only do I carry the responsibility to make sure I do that right, but I'm just really appreciative that I also get to lead this in a way that feels very right and authentic and values driven for Australia and for the globe. So if anything, I encourage other people to think about how they can do that as well and join me in trying to advocate for that.
Well, maybe we'll have to connect close to the time or afterwards so you can come on the podcast and talk about what that was like and
Yeah.
what you landed on. That'd be great. We'll make a note of that before we finish off and I'll let you go. I'll give you one more number to choose.
All right, number 2.
What's one future shift you think leaders aren't prepared for, but they should be?
I think values-driven leadership. We're seeing the US completely flip on a lot of progressive policy that was supportive of the things that I've been talking about today. And we're seeing how quickly people have walked away because either their livelihoods are threatened, or, maybe their status is threatened. So the biggest thing that I would advocate for is hold true to your values. And even in the face of adversity or leadership that does not align with your values, find another way. Don't put up with that. I think millennials, our generation, are really well known for changing the status quo, for walking away from businesses that don't hold true to their values and ethics. And so I would encourage all generations to keep advocating for the right thing, because if we don't do this and we do end up squabbling over money, status, opportunities, it's not going to benefit anyone in the end.
If you could leave one message for the next generation of leaders, and probably really those from underrepresented backgrounds, what would it be?
You can do anything with support and resilience. So if you don't have money and networks today, you've got the advantage of incredible platforms like LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, whatever you use to build bridges and build relationships. Find the right people that are going to help you level up, but don't fear the hard work. Hard work is there whether or not you choose the easy path or the hard path. So you may as well choose the hard path of achieving your dreams and, having to go through the ups and downs of life while you get there. So.
Renee, thank you for spending your time with us. I speak to a lot of people. I've spoken to over 100 leaders. And one of the things, it's always fascinating because everyone is so different. And there's a lot of people who are highly confident in themselves. And, it oozes through in conversations. What I love about my conversation with you is that you're so grounded and you so deeply know yourself and who you are and what you want. And you challenge yourself consistently to do brave new things. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and you're so young. You've got an amazing, amazing time ahead of you, and all the things I know, wonderful things you're going to achieve. So all the best. I will make a time to catch up with you after that conference you go to next year. But thank you so much for sharing your amazing story with us.
Thank you for a beautiful conversation and for asking the best questions and giving me the opportunity to share the conversation with you. It's been incredible. And I look forward to having that conversation in the future. Absolutely.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space. This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.